My name is Maya Reeves. I'm 32 years old. I live in Austin, Texas, and I have been teaching yoga for 8 years, which means I've spent nearly a decade watching people lie with their bodies. That sounds dramatic. It's not. It's Tuesday. Here's what 8 years on a mat teaches you. Everyone compensates. The guy who swears his hamstrings are fine but drops his left hip every single forward fold, he's compensating. The woman who says she doesn't carry stress but her traps are riding up by her ears like they're trying to evacuate her skeleton, compensating. People will tell you anything with their mouths. Their spines are more honest. I didn't start out wanting to teach yoga. I started out wanting to be a physical therapist, got halfway through an exercise science degree at UT, took an elective called Embodied Movement Practices that changed the trajectory of my entire professional life, and ended up certified in 3 modalities by 26. I teach vinyasa, restorative, and yin. I can tell within 4 breaths whether a student is breathing into their chest because they're anxious or because nobody ever taught them to breathe into their belly. I once caught a herniated disc in a student's lower back 2 weeks before the MRI confirmed it because I watched the way she avoided twisting left for 3 consecutive classes. My point is, I pay attention. It's not a hobby. It's how I earn my living. My grandmother taught me that skill before any certification program did. Grandma Dottie, my mom's mother, 5'2", glasses on a chain, and absolutely certain about everything, used to say, "Watch someone's feet, Maya, not their mouth. Feet tell you where a person's actually headed." She was a gardener, literal, not metaphorical. She kept a 1/4-acre plot behind her house in Round Rock that looked like a magazine spread, and every morning she walked it at 6 a.m. with a cup of coffee in one hand and a pair of shears in the other. She pulled weeds the instant she spotted them. Not later, not after breakfast, not when they got bigger, the instant they broke soil. "You don't let weeds get comfortable in your garden," she'd say, snapping something off at the root without even breaking stride. She taught me 2 things about money: earn it yourself and keep a garden nobody else waters. When I was 24, she walked me into a credit union in Round Rock and helped me open a savings account. Just mine, not linked to anyone, not visible from my primary bank, not shared with a boyfriend or a business partner or a well-meaning parent. "You'll need this one day," she said. Not because something bad will happen, because it's yours, and that matters. She taught me 2 things about people. First, when someone changes who they are depending on the room, none of those people are real. And second, and this is the one I didn't understand until much later, the person who tells you who someone else is, they're telling you who they are. She died 3 years ago. I still carry her wristwatch in the front pocket of my teaching bag, a Timex with a cracked crystal face that still keeps perfect time. She wore it every single day of her adult life, and she told me once, holding it up so the light caught the fractured glass, "A thing doesn't have to be pretty to be right." Before everything happened, my life was small and good and entirely mine. I taught 15 classes a week across 3 studios. I had a private client list I'd built 1 student at a time over 6 years. I volunteered Saturday mornings at the Community Wellness Center teaching a free, gentle yoga class for seniors. Linda and George showed up every single week without fail, and Linda always brought an extra granola bar because she'd decided I was too thin and was not interested in my opinion on the matter. I had a routine. I had a reputation I'd earned by showing up early, staying late, and remembering every student's name, their left knee problem, and whether they preferred bolsters or blankets for Shavasana. That was my life. Not glamorous, not wealthy, not the kind of life that makes anyone jealous from the outside, but mine. The Austin East Side fitness community is small enough that everybody knows everybody, and big enough that the gossip takes approximately 48 hours to circulate completely. There are maybe a dozen studios in a 5-mile radius, and the instructors all know each other because we substitute for each other's classes, attend each other's workshops, and share a group text chain that's technically about scheduling, but is 90% complaints about parking and the ongoing milk controversy in the Movement Lab staff fridge. Somebody keeps buying oat milk, somebody else keeps throwing it away. It's been 11 months, and we're no closer to a resolution. I was part of this community for 6 years. I taught at Rooted Yoga, Diane Chen's studio, the anchor of the East Side scene, the place everyone passed through. Diane is 61, started teaching yoga in the 90s when half of Austin didn't know what a downward dog was. And she runs her studio with the quiet authority of a woman who has survived every trend in the wellness industry and is tired of all of them. She was the first studio owner to give me a regular slot. I was 26, freshly certified, and I taught a trial class to 4 people, 2 of whom were Diane's friends she'd called in as favor bodies. But Diane watched me teach, and afterwards she said, You actually see people. That's harder to find than you'd think. She gave me the Tuesday morning slot. I've been there ever since. Then there was Movement Lab, which Marcus Hall opened 3 years ago. A space that lives somewhere between a CrossFit box and a library, all clean lines and quiet intensity. Marcus is a former college wrestler turned movement coach, and the studio reflects his personality. No nonsense, no incense, just work. He added yoga to his schedule because his personal training clients kept getting injured, and he needed someone who understood alignment. I was that someone. And The Collective, a newer co-op space that rents rooms by the hour. Less personal, more transactional, but consistent income and a stream of new students who sometimes became regulars. Across these 3 studios, I'd built something real. Not a brand, not a platform, a practice. 40-plus private students who trusted me with their bodies, their stress, their Tuesday morning tears during hip openers, because hip openers will do that to you, and if you know, you know. Connor Wells walked into Rooted Yoga's instructor orientation about 3 years ago. New personal trainer, transferred from a gym in Dallas. He had a resume full of certifications and a personality that entered the room 3 seconds before his body did. He was, and I want to be fair here, because being fair about someone who later tried to systematically dismantle your professional reputation is its own kind of discipline, genuinely skilled at his job. He knew anatomy. He was attentive with clients. He had the kind of smile that made people feel like they were the only person in the room, which is a useful skill when you're being paid by the hour, and a deeply suspicious one when you're not. He pursued me, slowly, with strategy. He came to my Saturday morning volunteer class 3 weeks in a row before he said a single word to me beyond "nice class," and when he finally asked me to coffee, he'd prepared a list of questions about my teaching philosophy that he'd clearly researched beforehand. In retrospect, the reconnaissance was thorough. At the time, I thought it was flattering. I told Priya about it, and she said, "That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or the opening scene of a true crime podcast. Report back." For about a year, it was good, genuinely good. He was warm in public, supportive at studio events. He organized a charity boot camp and insisted I co-lead the cool-down portion, which felt generous and collaborative. He remembered my students' names. He brought blueberry muffins to instructor meetings, homemade, not from a box, because Connor Wells understood that details are how you build a brand. The community absorbed him like he'd always been there, and I absorbed him into my life the same way. But here's the thing about reading bodies for a living. Eventually, you notice the compensations even when you don't want to. He was different when nobody was watching. Not cruel, not abusive, just dimmer. Like the wattage dropped when the audience left the room. He'd be animated and electric at a studio networking event, and then go completely flat in my car on the drive home, answering my questions in monosyllables, scrolling his phone while I talked. He remembered every client's name and forgot my sister's birthday twice. He'd tell Diane one version of a conversation we'd had, and tell Marcus a slightly different version, and when I pointed out the inconsistency, he'd look at me like I was manufacturing a problem out of nothing. "You're overthinking it, Maya." He said that a lot. Grandma Dottie's voice, unbidden. When someone changes who they are depending on the room, none of those people are real. I dismissed it. I'm a professional observer of other people's compensations, and an amateur at best when it comes to my own. And then there was Brianna Marsh, 33, studio manager at Flow State, which was the gym where Connor based most of his personal training practice. Brianna and Connor had dated briefly, 3 or 4 months maybe, before I came along. She described the relationship as ancient history, in a tone of voice that suggested she had practiced that sentence in front of a mirror. Brianna was perfectly pleasant to my face. She laughed at my jokes at community events. She complimented my classes when she happened to attend. And she was perfectly, precisely silent every time Connor told a story in mixed company that made me sound slightly less competent, slightly less stable, slightly less worth listening to than I was. She didn't add to those stories. She just didn't correct them. which, in a small community, is its own kind of campaign. 18 months in, I drove to Connor's apartment on a Tuesday evening to drop off a yoga block he'd borrowed for a client demo. His front door was unlocked. I will not give you the specifics because they don't matter, and also because I would like to retain the ability to eat dinner tonight. What I will tell you is that the woman on his couch was not me, and she was not borrowing his yoga block. I ended it that night, cleanly. I did not yell, I did not throw things, I did not give a speech. I said, "We're done." And he said, "Maya, wait." And I said, "We're done." Again. Because I learned a long time ago that the second time you say something is usually the one that sticks. Then I drove home, and I sat in my car in my driveway for 20 minutes with the engine running because I did not have the energy to turn the key. What would you have done? Confronted the other person? Or just walked away? The review started 17 days later. I know it was 17 days because Priya, my best friend, who I will properly introduce shortly, timestamps everything she encounters on the internet, including her own emotional reactions. She had the metadata pulled before I thought to ask. The first one appeared on my private teaching page. 1 star, anonymous username. Took her restorative class. She was distracted and seemed uninterested in her students. Wouldn't recommend. I read it on my phone while eating cereal standing over my kitchen sink and felt a small, cold pebble drop into my stomach. I had never received a rating below 4 stars in 6 years of teaching. Not once. My average was a 4.8, and I had earned that number 1 student at a time, 1 class at a time, over 2,000 sessions of showing up and paying attention. The second one appeared 4 days later. 1 star. Different anonymous account, different username, identical energy. Uncomfortable experience. Her hands-on adjustments felt inappropriate, and I didn't feel safe telling her to stop. I won't be going back. I put my cereal spoon down. A yoga instructor accused of inappropriate physical contact is not a bad review. It is a professional death sentence. In a post-Me Too world, in a discipline built entirely on trust and physical proximity, in a community where hands-on adjustments are both essential to good teaching and a minefield of consent, that accusation is a loaded weapon pointed at someone's livelihood. I knew that. Whoever wrote that review knew it too. The sentence was too precise to be careless. The third review came a week after that. 1 star. Another new account. Showed up 10 minutes late to her own class, made weird comments about my body during the session. Not professional, and I felt judged. This one described a Monday evening vinyasa class I taught at Movement Lab, except that I have never, in my teaching career, arrived late to a class. I arrive 15 minutes early. Marcus has teased me about this for 3 years running, calling me his most anxiously punctual contractor. And I have never once commented on a student's body in class because that is literally the first thing they teach you not to do in every single certification program I've ever completed. It's Rule 1, Page 1. Don't do that. 3 reviews. 3 lies. 17 days, 21 days, 28 days after the breakup. Spaced like a drip campaign. Like someone who understood pacing. But I didn't yet know about the other campaign. The quiet one. It was Marcus who told me. He called me on a Thursday afternoon, and his voice had that careful, measured quality that people use when they've been turning something over in their head for several days and have finally decided they owe you the truth more than they owe the situation their silence. Hey, Maya. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know I'm asking because I care about you and I don't want to make assumptions. He asked if I was doing okay, if the breakup had been hard on me, if I was, and he hesitated, having trouble moving on. My stomach dropped for the second time that month. That's when I learned that Connor had been talking. Not to me, to everyone around me. To Marcus, he'd said I was struggling emotionally, and it was affecting my professionalism. To Diane, he'd implied I was erratic during the relationship, that there had been incidents he didn't want to go into, but wanted people to know about. To our shared friend group, 6 or 7 people we'd regularly seen together at studio events and weekend cookouts, he'd told a story about me texting him constantly after the breakup, showing up at his training sessions unannounced, being unable to accept that the relationship was over, behaving, in his telling, like a woman who was coming apart. None of this was true. I had texted him exactly once after the breakup, once, to ask him to return my spare apartment key. He never responded. I had not attended a single one of his classes or training sessions. I had actively rerouted my morning runs to avoid passing flow state because I did not want to see his face. But stories are like water. They find the path of least resistance. And in a small community where everyone talks to everyone, the path from Connor's mouth to every ear that mattered was very, very short. And then Marcus said the sentence that changed everything. He said something the other day that really bothered me. He said, and I'm going to tell you exactly what he said because I think you deserve to hear it. Maya was always better at bending than thinking. All flexibility, no spine. I sat on my kitchen floor with the phone pressed against my ear, and I felt something realign in my chest. Not rage, not sadness. Something quieter and harder and more precise. Something that had the clarity of a tuning fork struck against a hard surface. Grandma Dottie's voice, sudden and sharp and completely unbidden. The person who tells you who someone else is, they're telling you who they are. I understood. For the first time since she'd said those words to me, I was maybe 16, sitting at her kitchen table. I completely understood what she meant. Connor wasn't grieving our relationship. He wasn't processing a breakup. He wasn't even angry. He was landscaping. He was systematically reshaping the terrain of our shared community so that when anyone looked at the wreckage, they'd see an erratic, clingy woman and a reasonable, concerned man. He was controlling the story because the real story, that he'd cheated and been caught, made him look exactly as small as he actually was. He was pulling weeds, except the weed was me. The invitations stopped first. Sarah, who I'd known for 4 years, who texted me every Friday without fail to ask if I wanted to grab dinner at the Thai place on East 7th, stopped texting. I sent her a message on a Friday evening. Thai tonight? She responded 3 days later with something about being super busy lately, rain check. The brevity had a shape to it. I know what a real rain check sounds like, and I know what a withdrawal sounds like, and this sounded like a withdrawal wrapped in an exclamation point. Then Jen went quiet. She didn't unfriend me. That would have required a decision she wasn't willing to make. She just stopped responding to messages. Then Michael, who I'd known since my first year at Rooted Yoga, started giving me a wide berth at community events, standing on the other side of the room, avoiding eye contact, orbiting me like I was a planet he'd been warned about. The group text died next. Not for everyone, just for me. I could see the red receipts multiplying on my messages, which meant people were reading them. They just weren't responding. It's a specific kind of silence, the kind that's louder than any conversation, because it tells you that a group of people have all independently decided to step back, and none of them are going to tell you why. Studio bookings shifted. Diane didn't cancel my classes outright, but she stopped offering me the premium Saturday afternoon slot that I'd held for 2 years. Marcus called me, gently, to ask if I wanted to take a break from the Monday evening vinyasa, the exact class the fake review had targeted. He said it was for my well-being, and I heard the quotation marks in his voice even though he didn't use them. The collective stopped responding to my emails about renewing my hourly room rental. 3 studio relationships strained, 6 friendships gone silent, a Saturday afternoon slot taken away, 40-plus students who could Google my name and find 3 anonymous reviews suggesting I was unprofessional at best and unsafe at worst. My phone stopped ringing. I stopped pretending it was a coincidence. Priya Patel called me on a Wednesday night at 9:45. I picked up and didn't say anything for about 4 seconds, which is how she knew something was deeply wrong, because I am normally a person who answers the phone mid-sentence about something unrelated. "Okay," she said. I could hear her chewing something. Priya is a web designer by profession and a perpetual snacker by vocation. She records voice memos that run 8 minutes minimum, and she is always eating during them. Crackers, chips, sometimes what sounds like an entire rotisserie chicken. She processes information through her jaw. "Okay, tell me everything. Start from the beginning. And don't minimize it, because I can already hear you constructing a version that makes you sound fine. And I don't want the fine version. I want the real one." I told her everything. The reviews, Connor's whisper campaign, Marcus's phone call, the cruel line, the empty group text, the bookings. All of it. Every piece. She was quiet for exactly the amount of time it takes to swallow a mouthful of what I later learned was leftover pad thai. Then she said, "The fact that anyone in a professional community believes that a woman who has shown up 15 minutes early to her own classes for 6 consecutive years is suddenly erratic tells me everything about them and nothing about you." Also, she added, and I heard the shift in her voice from friend to technician. Anonymous reviews have IP metadata embedded in the posting data. The platform logs it. Send me the links to all 3 reviews and give me 48 hours. That's Priya. She built her first website at 14. She reverse engineered a phishing scam at 22 using nothing but email headers and what she calls vibes-based forensic analysis. And she once traced a fake Yelp review for a restaurant client back to the restaurant across the street using IP geolocation data. She is 5'3", and she approaches injustice the way most people approach a buffet, with enthusiasm and a plan. I made a decision that night. Not a dramatic one. I didn't write it in a journal by candlelight or stand in front of a mirror giving myself a speech. I sat on my couch with my teaching bag next to me, and I reached into the front pocket and felt the familiar shape of Grandma Dottie's Timex under my fingertips. Cracked crystal face, still ticking, keeping time when nothing else felt reliable. I was not going to fight the lie. I was going to outlast it. I was going to be the person this community already knew me to be, before Connor Wells decided to rewrite the story. And if the lie was louder than the truth right now, that was fine. Because loudness fades. Consistency doesn't. I started with what I could control, documenting what had actually happened. I'm a yoga instructor. My entire professional life is built on observing sequences, the way one movement connects to the next, the way a single compensation pattern in one joint reveals itself across an entire chain of movement if you watch long enough. A student who drops their left shoulder in every chaturanga isn't doing it randomly. There's a chain of tension running from their wrist through their rotator cuff into their thoracic spine. You don't treat the shoulder. You trace the pattern to its source. I applied the same discipline to Connor's campaign. I made a spreadsheet. Not because I am naturally a spreadsheet person. I teach people to breathe for a living and my filing system involves a series of tote bags. But because patterns live in timelines, and timelines need structure. I listed every anonymous review with its date, its specific content, and what had happened in my professional life the week before it appeared. Review 1 appeared 17 days after the breakup, but more importantly, it appeared 4 days after Diane had offered me a weekend workshop slot, a visible promotion in the community hierarchy. Review 2 appeared the week after Diane mentioned expanding my regular class schedule. Review 3, the one accusing me of body-shaming a student, went up exactly 1 week after Marcus had publicly thanked me at a community event for 6 years of incredible teaching. He'd said it in front of 40 people. Connor was in the room. Every time I advanced professionally, a review appeared. Every time the community recognized me, the campaign escalated. The correlation was so clean, you could graph it. Apparently, my professional success was directly proportional to someone's need to tear me down. In yoga terms, that's called a reactive compensation pattern, and it tells you exactly where the injury is. The injury was Connor's ego, and every time my career put weight on it, it spasmed. Priya delivered the IP data within 9 days. She called me at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, eating chips, obviously, the crunch coming through the phone like she was narrating a documentary from inside a Doritos bag. And she said, "Okay, so I've got good news and I've got confirming news. The good news is you're not crazy. The confirming news is what you already suspected." 2 of the 3 reviews were posted from the same IP address. Priya traced it to a residential location in East Austin, a location that matched the apartment complex where Connor lived. The 3rd review was posted from a mobile device connected to a commercial Wi-Fi network registered to Flow State Studio, where Connor trained, where Brianna managed the operations, where, according to the metadata, someone logged into a brand new account at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening, composed a 1-star review of my restorative class, and posted it at 9:53 p.m. 6 minutes, Priya said, crunching. That is not a thoughtful review from a disappointed student reflecting on their experience. That is a pre-written hit job from someone who had the sentences loaded in their clipboard and just needed to paste, click, and go. Could be Brianna, I said. Could be Brianna on his behalf, Priya said. Same network, same result. Different finger on the keyboard, same person driving the car. I saved every screenshot. I saved the metadata reports. I saved Priya's analysis, which she had formatted with headers and color coding because Priya approaches friendship the way she approaches client projects, with deliverables. This wasn't a legal case. I wasn't building toward a courtroom. I was building toward clarity, my own. When you can see the full pattern, the pattern loses the power it had when it was invisible. Meanwhile, I did the only thing I have ever known how to do when things fall apart. I showed up. That's not a metaphor. I mean, I physically, literally showed up. To every class still on my schedule, 10 minutes early. Mat rolled, playlist cued. Smile not forced, but not fake either. The specific smile of a woman who is going to teach the hell out of this class, whether or not you believe what you read about her on the internet. I stayed 15 minutes after every session to answer questions, adjust students' block placements, and talk to the people who lingered. I signed up to lead the next community wellness event, a free Saturday class series for underserved neighborhoods, before anyone asked. I volunteered for the subcommittee. I took the planning calls. Connor had expected me to retreat. Every whisper campaign depends on the target doing the thing the campaign claims they are, falling apart, becoming unstable, disappearing. My presence was the one variable he hadn't accounted for. There's a concept in yoga called tapas, not the Spanish food, the Sanskrit principle. It means disciplined heat, the willingness to stay in a pose that burns because the staying is the work. That's what those first weeks felt like. Not comfortable, not triumphant, just heat, just staying. I taught a vinyasa class at Movement Lab where 3 students I recognized from the community events didn't show up. Their mats stayed in the rack. Their spots in the room stayed empty. I taught the class to the students who did show up, and I taught it well because the people in front of me deserved my full attention regardless of the people who weren't. A new student came to my Tuesday morning class at Rooted, a woman named Carolyn who'd found me through a physical therapist's recommendation, not through my teaching page. After class, she said, "I've been looking for an instructor who actually pays attention to alignment, and I think I found her." I thanked her and did not cry in the supply closet afterwards, but it was a near thing. Diane noticed. She didn't say anything at first. Diane is not a woman who wastes words on observations she hasn't fully processed. But I caught her watching me set up for a Thursday morning class with the careful attention she usually reserves for evaluating new instructor applicants, and I saw the moment her shoulders settled half an inch. A postural shift I know how to read because I've spent a decade watching bodies tell the truth. She was recalibrating, updating an assumption she hadn't realized she'd made. Here's what teaching yoga for 8 years will teach you about life. Consistency is its own argument. You do not have to announce your competence. You do not have to defend your character with words. You show up, and you do the work, and you do it again, and you do it again. And eventually, the accumulated weight of your presence becomes heavier than any story someone is telling about you in rooms you're not in. The body doesn't lie, and neither does showing up. Priya came to my Saturday morning volunteer class 3 weeks into the rebuild. She unrolled a mat in the back row, positioned herself between Linda and George, and attempted a downward dog that looked like a camping tent collapsing in slow motion during a mild earthquake. "I'm here for moral support," she whisper-shouted, loud enough for half the room to hear. "And also because I pulled something in my back opening a jar of pickles and I figured yoga might fix it." After class, she handed me a printed timeline, color-coded. Every review, every documented lie Connor had told, every career advancement of mine that preceded an attack, mapped against the calendar with the precision of a project manager who takes personal grudges very seriously. "You see it, right?" she said, tapping the printout with a chip-dusted finger. I did. It looked like a heartbeat monitor. Every spike in my professional visibility produced a corresponding spike in his campaign. My success was his trigger. My competence was the threat. Not because I was doing anything to him, but because every time the community recognized me, it made his story about the erratic, unstable ex-girlfriend harder to sell. During this time, I also reconnected with someone I thought I'd lost. Angela, a fellow yoga instructor I'd known for 4 years, had gone quiet after the breakup. She hadn't been cruel about it, she'd just stepped back, the way people do when they hear 2 versions of a story and don't feel equipped to determine which one is true. I didn't confront her. I didn't explain. I just kept teaching the Tuesday morning class where she sometimes dropped in, and I taught it exactly the way I'd always taught it, with attention, with care, with the 15 minutes early punctuality that is apparently my personality's most defining feature. After 3 weeks of watching me be exactly the same person I'd been for 4 years, she lingered after class. "I think I owe you a conversation," she said. "You don't owe me anything," I said, "but I'd love to have one." Over coffee, she told me what Connor had told her, that I was obsessive, that I couldn't accept the breakup, that I'd shown up at his apartment multiple times. She said it had sounded off to her, but she didn't know what to do with the discomfort, so she'd done nothing. I told her I understood. I told her the truth. She listened, and I watched her shoulders drop. And if you've spent as many years as I have watching bodies release tension they didn't know they were carrying, you know what that looks like. Relief. "All flexibility, no spine," I said, quoting the line to her. "That's what he's been saying about me." She shook her head slowly. "That doesn't sound like the woman who shows up at 6 a.m. on Saturdays to teach a free class for senior citizens." "No," I said, "it doesn't." Connor, meanwhile, was getting comfortable. That's what happens when you run a whisper campaign and nobody pushes back. You start to believe your own press. He was telling the story more loosely now, to wider circles, with less attention to consistency. He told Diane I'd been clingy during the relationship. He told a different instructor that I'd been emotionally volatile. He told Marcus, and this is the one that mattered, the one that kept me up at night, that he was worried about her students. He told Brianna that he thought my teaching was declining, and Brianna repeated it to a studio owner at the collective, and the collective declined to renew my room rental. But the stories were starting to contradict each other. To Diane, I was erratic. To Marcus, I was obsessive. To the friend group, I was unable to move on. To the collective, I was professionally declining. You can't be all of those things at once. You can be 1 or 2 of them, maybe, on a bad month. But all of them simultaneously? That's not a description of a person. That's a description of a campaign. And campaigns, unlike people, have a hard time keeping their stories straight. If you noticed a pattern like this in someone's behavior, would you confront them directly, or would you document first and wait? The overreach happened on a Thursday. A new review appeared on my teaching page. 1 star. Anonymous. Fresh account, no other reviews. This one described a Thursday evening restorative class at Rooted Yoga, in which the reviewer claimed I had made them uncomfortable with inappropriate physical cues and an aggressive energy that felt unsafe for a restorative setting. Priya flagged the IP within hours. Flow State's commercial network. Same pattern, same source. But the IP wasn't why this review mattered. It mattered because I didn't teach that Thursday evening restorative class. I hadn't taught a Thursday evening slot at Rooted Yoga in over 5 weeks. Diane had shifted my schedule during the pullback period, and that particular class had been covered by a substitute instructor named Rachel, a newer teacher who'd taken the slot gratefully and taught it without incident. Diane had the schedule. It was posted on the studio wall. It was published on the studio website. It was archived in the booking software with timestamps. The review also described the studio layout incorrectly. The anonymous reviewer wrote that they had placed their mat near the east wall by the props shelf. The props shelf at Rooted Yoga is on the west wall. It has been on the west wall since Diane opened the studio 15 years ago. Every person who has ever taken a class there, every actual student, every real human who has physically entered that room, would know this. You cannot miss the props shelf. It is 8 feet long and holds 40 bolsters. One detail too specific. One detail too wrong. Connor had written a review about a class I never taught, describing a room he could not accurately picture because he had never actually attended one of my restorative sessions. He'd been so comfortable in his own campaign, so confident that nobody was checking, that he stopped verifying his fabrications against reality. And then came the worst part. Angela and I had been meeting for coffee weekly, rebuilding what Connor's narrative had flattened, and during one of those conversations, she mentioned something that she delivered casually, like an afterthought, like it wasn't going to rearrange my understanding of the previous 6 months. You know, she said, stirring her latte, Brianna let something slip at the Flow State holiday party last December, before you and Connor even broke up. She made a comment about how Connor had been planning his exit strategy from the relationship for weeks and needed to make sure the community heard his version first. I set my coffee cup down on the saucer, and the sound it made was very small and very precise. This was not a reactive campaign. He hadn't started telling lies because the breakup hurt, or because he was angry, or because rejection had made him irrational. He had planned it. Before I found him on that couch, before I said, "We're done," before there was even a breakup to react to, he had been positioning. He'd been seeding the narrative with Brianna, with studio owners, with friends, because he knew that eventually I would find out about the cheating, and when I did, he needed the community to already be primed with his version. This wasn't a whisper campaign born from pain. It was premeditated reputation destruction, executed with the same careful planning he'd used to charm his way into the community in the first place. My hands were shaking. I am not a person whose hands shake. I hold handstands for 60 seconds. I demonstrate arm balances in front of classes. My hands are my tools, and they do not shake. I went home. I opened my teaching bag. I reached into the front pocket and closed my fingers around Grandma Dottie's Timex. Cracked crystal, still keeping time, counting the seconds whether anyone was watching or not. A thing doesn't have to be pretty to be right, and the truth doesn't have to be loud to be real. The monthly community wellness planning meeting fell on the first Tuesday of the month. Diane's back studio at Rooted Yoga, the one she uses for meetings and teacher trainings and the occasional stern conversation with an instructor who's been consistently late. Folding table, bad coffee. 8 chairs arranged in a rough circle. The people in those chairs. Diane, Marcus, 3 lead instructors, including me and a woman named Teresa who teaches Pilates and has the quiet, observational energy of someone who has seen a lot and chosen to comment on very little. Tomas, the community wellness coordinator, who organized the Saturday volunteer series and kept meticulous records of everything. Brianna, representing Flow State. And Connor. I did not plan anything. I need you to hear that clearly. I did not walk in with a folder of evidence under my arm. I did not rehearse a speech in my bathroom mirror. I did not coordinate with Priya or Angela or anyone. I went to the meeting because I had been attending these meetings for 4 years, and I was not going to let someone's campaign remove me from the table I had earned my seat at. Diane had the agenda printed. She was running through the spring schedule, which studios would host which community workshops, how the teaching rotation would work, who had capacity for additional programming. Normal. Routine. The kind of meeting where you drink burnt coffee from a paper cup and debate whether the free Saturday class should be 60 minutes or 75. Connor was relaxed. He had his ankle crossed over his knee and his arm draped over the back of his folding chair, and he was performing the thing he always performed in group settings, the version of himself that made everyone feel like they were in the presence of someone important, approachable, easy, golden. Brianna sat next to him with her laptop open, taking notes with the efficient focus of someone who believes their proximity to a confident man is a form of professional development. The turn happened because of the schedule. Diane was assigning spring workshop slots, and she looked at me across the table and said, "Maya, I'd like you to take the Thursday evening restorative slot at Rooted for the spring series. You haven't had it in a while, but your attendance numbers were always the strongest in that time slot, and I'd like to bring them back up." And Connor said, not aggressively, not loudly, almost casually, the way someone drops a concern they've been carrying lightly, "I'm not sure that's the best idea right now. I've heard some concerns about that class specifically." The room didn't shift. Not yet. but Diane looked at him with the particular attention of a woman who has owned a yoga studio for 15 years and has developed a finely tuned instinct for the difference between a genuine concern and a planted one. "What concerns?" she said. "There were some reviews online about Maya's restorative sessions here. A few clients mentioned feeling uncomfortable." Diane reached for her laptop. She opened it the way she opens everything, deliberately, without hurry. And this is when I learned something I hadn't known. Diane had been watching the reviews for weeks. She had been conducting her own quiet investigation since Marcus first mentioned the Whisper campaign to her. Because Diane Chen does not make decisions about her instructors based on anonymous internet comments. And she does not appreciate when someone in her community assumes she would. "There's one review in particular I want to discuss," Diane said. Her voice was level, no drama, just facts. "A 1-star review that describes a Thursday evening restorative class at this studio. The reviewer claims they placed their mat by the east wall near the props shelf." She looked at Connor. Then she looked at the west wall of her own studio, where the props shelf has been positioned for 15 years, holding 40 bolsters and 60 blocks and a collection of eye pillows that Linda donated last Christmas. "Maya hasn't taught a Thursday evening class at this studio in over 5 weeks, Diane continued. "Rachel covered that slot. I have the schedule." She held up a printed page, dated, initialed. The class described in that review was not taught by Maya, and the room described in that review is not this room. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was the specific silence of 8 professionals processing information that rearranges what they thought they knew. Connor's body shifted. If you weren't someone who reads bodies for a living, you wouldn't have noticed, but I was sitting 4 feet away, and I noticed everything. His weight transferred to his left hip. His ankle came off his knee. His right hand moved to the arm of his chair and gripped it. Those are compensation patterns. That's a structure encountering an unexpected load and trying to redistribute the weight. I've been diagnosing exactly that kind of reaction for 8 years. Usually it's in someone's lumbar spine. Today, it was in someone's conscience. "I don't know anything about that review specifically," Connor said. Denial. Stage 1. "I was just passing along what I'd heard from people in the community." Tomas leaned forward. Tomas, the community coordinator, who had been sitting quietly through the entire meeting with his clipboard and his scheduling spreadsheets, who I had always thought of as a pleasant, neutral presence. "I've heard concerns too," he said. Slowly, carefully, like he'd been waiting for an opening. "But the concerns I've heard all came from the same source. Every concern about Maya that has reached me in the last 4 months originated with you, Connor, or with someone who heard it from you first." I watched Marcus nod. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His nod contained 4 months of his own quiet observation. Marcus is a former wrestler. He understands positioning. Teresa looked at me from across the table. She didn't say anything either, but she uncrossed her arms, and in body language that is the equivalent of opening a door. Connor shifted to deflection, stage 2. "Look, I think we're blowing this out of proportion. I was trying to be helpful. I care about this community. Brianna, you've heard some of these concerns too, right?" He turned to Brianna. And Brianna Marsh, who had spread his narrative through her studio contacts, who had facilitated reviews from the Flow State Network, who had been performing the role of concerned professional ally while operating as the logistics wing of his campaign, looked at the faces around the table. She looked at Diane's steady gaze. She looked at Tomas's clipboard. She looked at Marcus's jaw. And she did the math. "I think," Brianna said, very carefully, looking at her laptop screen as though the answer might be found somewhere between her meeting notes. "There may have been some miscommunication. That is the sound an enabler makes when the cost of loyalty exceeds the cost of silence. It's a very specific sound. It sounds like a door closing and a window opening at the same time. Connor's performance collapsed. The warmth drained. The Golden Boy wattage dimmed. And what surfaced was harder, smaller, meaner, and more frightened than anything the community had been shown for 2 years. "This is ridiculous," he said, and his voice was louder now, sharper, and this was attack. Stage 3. "You're going to take her word over mine? She's been obsessed with me since we broke up. She has been making my life difficult for months. She's the one who can't let go. I texted you once," I said. My voice was level. My hands were still. 8 years of holding poses under strain teaches you exactly one thing about composure. You find it in the exhale, not the inhale. Once, to ask for my apartment key back. You never responded. I looked directly at him, not with anger. With the same quality of attention I give a student whose alignment has been wrong so long they've forgotten what correct feels like. Every anonymous review on my teaching page was posted from the Flow State Network or from your home IP address. I have the metadata documentation. Every escalation in your campaign corresponds to a professional advancement of mine. I have the timeline. You told Diane I was erratic. You told Marcus I was obsessive. You told 6 of our mutual friends a story about a woman who doesn't exist because the real one left you for a reason you couldn't afford to let this community hear. The room watched him. He looked for a friendly face the way a drowning person looks for a shoreline. There wasn't one. Marcus was studying the table. Tomas was writing something on his clipboard. Teresa had leaned back in her chair. Brianna was staring at her laptop screen like it might open a portal to another dimension where she hadn't made the choices she'd made. You said I was all flexibility and no spine, I said. But I'm the one still sitting in this room. And you're the one who can't look at anyone in it. He couldn't. Diane closed her laptop. I'm going to recommend to every studio owner in this community that Connor's teaching and training privileges be formally reviewed. I'm asking Brianna to provide Flow State's network access logs voluntarily. Maya's spring schedule is confirmed as proposed, including the Thursday restorative slot. I think we're done for today. Nobody argued. Connor stood up. He walked out through the studio door into the parking lot. He didn't slam it. He just left. And the room absorbed his absence the way a yoga class absorbs the departure of a student who wasn't committed to the practice, completely and without adjusting the tempo. Teresa looked at me from across the table and said, "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." And Marcus said, very quietly, "Me too." I nodded. I didn't have a speech prepared. I didn't need one. The schedule was enough. The truth was enough. Consequences in a small professional community don't arrive as a single verdict. They arrive as a series of quiet corrections, each one small, each one permanent. Flow State did not renew Connor's personal training contract. The studio owners reviewed Brianna's network logs, found exactly what Priya's metadata had already confirmed, and the conversation that followed was reportedly brief and unpleasant. Brianna retained her position but was removed from management responsibilities. The studio owners brought in an outside operations manager who had no history with anyone involved and no interest in acquiring one. Connor's charity boot camp, the one he'd organized with such public generosity, was quietly removed from the community calendar. Not canceled, technically, just not rescheduled. It's a distinction that matters only to the person it's happening to. I heard through the grapevine, which in Austin's fitness community means through approximately 3 separate people within 48 hours, that Connor tried to join a gym network on the north side of town. I don't know if it worked out. I don't follow his career the way he followed mine. That's not my garden to tend. The fake reviews were reported to the platform with the IP documentation Priya had compiled. The platform's trust and safety team removed all 3 within 8 days.
My rating returned to 4.8, the number I'd earned over 6 years, one honest student at a time. The friend group rearranged itself along lines I hadn't predicted. Sarah reached out 3 weeks after the meeting with a message that was 4 paragraphs long and contained the phrase, "I should have asked you directly instead of stepping back." I appreciated the honesty. I told her so. Jen never reached out at all. I don't know what story she's telling herself about why, and I decided that's not my business. Michael sent a single text, "I'm sorry, Maya," and I responded, "I know," and we left it there. Some people came back, some didn't. I learned to let both be true without requiring either to be comfortable. Connor reached out once, a text message, 6 weeks after the meeting. Long, carefully composed. It did not contain the word sorry. What it contained was a lot of phrases like, "my perspective at the time," and "I think we both handled things in ways we regret," and "I hope we can find a way to move forward as professionals." It was the linguistic equivalent of a downward dog performed with perfect form and zero presence. Technically correct and completely empty.
I read it on my couch at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. I read it twice. Not because it deserved 2 readings, but because I wanted to make sure I responded to what he actually wrote, and not what I wished he'd written. You planned this campaign before I even discovered you cheating. Brianna confirmed that at the Flow State holiday party months before we broke up. You told her you were planning your exit strategy and needed the community to hear your version first. You posted fake reviews designed to make my students afraid of me. You told people I was unstable so that when the truth about our breakup came out, nobody would believe the woman telling it. I paused. I took a breath. The kind of breath I teach my students. Into the belly, not the chest. Slow expansion, long exhale, controlled release. I'm not interested in your perspective at the time. I'm interested in you understanding what it cost me. 4 months of isolation, 6 friendships damaged, professional opportunities lost, 3 anonymous reviews that told potential students I was unsafe to be near. You didn't do any of that because you were hurting. You did it because you needed to be the good guy in a story where you weren't. I put the phone down. I did not wait for a reply. I did not receive one. It has been 7 months since that meeting in Diane's back studio. I teach 17 classes a week now, 2 more than I had before everything happened. Diane gave me the Thursday evening restorative slot, the one the fake review tried to poison, and it fills every week. Waiting list of 3. Marcus started referring his personal training clients to my yoga classes for mobility work, which means I now regularly teach former wrestlers how to touch their toes. And if that isn't evidence of a generous universe, I don't know what is. The collective renewed my room rental, without my asking. I rebuilt. Not because I gave a speech, or went viral, or posted a takedown, or made Connor's name trend on social media. I rebuilt because I showed up 17 times a week, 10 minutes early, 15 minutes late, remembering every student's name and their left knee problem and whether they prefer bolsters or blankets. Over and over and over, I was the person the reviews said I wasn't. Consistency. It turns out that's the argument nobody knows how to counter and nobody expects a woman to make. Angela and I have coffee every Tuesday now. She told me last week that she still feels guilty about stepping back during the campaign, and I told her the truth. You didn't have enough information to know what to do. Now you do. That's not guilt. That's growth. My grandmother would have hated that line. Too soft. Too forgiving. She would have said, "Tell her to grow faster next time." Priya came to my Saturday volunteer class again last week. Her Warrior 2 still looks like a woman trying to hail a taxi during a moderate wind event, but she shows up. And she brings the same energy she brings to everything. Loud, technically precise in her own domain, completely undone by anything involving her hamstrings. After class, Linda offered her a granola bar, and Priya accepted it with the solemnity of a person receiving a professional achievement award. "I'm a regular now," Priya informed me, crunching. "I have seniority. Linda knows my name." Linda knows everyone's name. That's because Linda is the backbone of this community, and we should all aspire to Linda's energy. She's not wrong. She's never wrong. She's just occasionally loud about it. Last Sunday evening, I unpacked my teaching bag after a long day. 3 classes taught, 8 new students across the week. My hands were tired in the specific way they get when you've spent hours adjusting other people's alignment and holding space for other people's process and doing the work your hands were trained to do. I reached into the front pocket and felt the Timex. Grandma Dottie's cracked crystal face. Still keeping time. Keeping time whether anyone was watching or not. Whether anyone believed it was accurate or not. Whether the surface was damaged or not. I used to think her saying, "Watch their feet, not their mouth," was only about catching liars, about spotting the Connor Welleses of the world before they could build a campaign against you. And it is about that. It's partly about that. But it's also about watching your own feet, knowing where you're walking even when someone is telling you you're lost. Even when someone is telling a community full of people that you're erratic, that you're unstable, that you're all flexibility and no spine. You watch your own feet. And if your feet keep walking you into the same studio, the same Saturday morning class, the same room with Linda and George and a granola bar and a cracked wristwatch in your bag, then your feet are telling you something your mouth doesn't need to say. You're exactly where you belong. Not because someone gave you permission, because you walked there yourself. I held the watch in my palm, ran my thumb over the cracked face, heard her voice one more time, clear as a Sunday morning. A thing doesn't have to be pretty to be right. No, Grandma Dottie, it doesn't. But it does have to keep going. And my clock is still ticking. If this story landed somewhere real, subscribe. I'll be here next week, early, as always.